Imagine for a moment that you find yourself alone in the woods. The air is crisp and cold. Around you, the usual din of nature ceases to exist. The hair on the back of your neck raises. You have heard of this. A night in Ireland upon which the seams between our world and that of the other kinds that dwell beyond our perception rip and strain, the veil thinning out in certain places. You are certain, beyond all doubt now, that you are in one of those places, on the worst night to happen upon one. The silence forces each muscle in your body to coil up like a drawn bowstring. You freeze, unsure what to do, or if you can do anything at all. Snap, crack, from a nearby hedgerow, a fox staring directly at you. Beyond him, a stag's eyes bore into you. You thank your God, maybe a few of the other ones too, just to throw more names in the hat, for this relief. Your muscles unroll like a tide, all the while unaware of what's creeping up behind you. Thank you for joining me. My name is Sean Spillane. I've spent the last year collecting stories, eyewitness accounts, and anecdotes of the most strange and sinister sides of Irish folklore and mythology. Welcome to Tales Unbound. On this visit to the bonfire, we will be discussing the origins and roots of Samhain, the Irish festival which later became Halloween, and one of the earliest stories of a haunting on All Hallows Eve ever recounted. To introduce the Samhain, I invited Dr. Declan Downey to speak about the origins of Halloween as the Samhain and the early stages of its evolution to what we know today.
Well, we're approaching Samhain, which is the beginning of the Celtic year. It's not the end, it's the beginning. It's the time of year when nature begins to go quiet, and people associate it with death, they associate it with great silence in the countryside, that there's no growth, but in fact there is growth, but we don't see it. It's what's underneath the ground. All the energy that plants had built up over the spring and summer, the chlorophyll, all of that, it's energy that's stored back into the roots, fed into the roots, so as to give rise to that new burst of growth in the spring. It is also a time for cleaning up the land, clearing the drains, the ditches, the farms, etc., sorting out the gardens as well. So it's an interesting season because it's a season of quietness and preparation. And that's the preparation leading into the new life. In the darkness of the womb, life begins. And so we are entering into the darkness of the womb again now that the sun has set on the year here in the northern hemisphere. And that's what our ancient ancestors understood from this cycle. So with Samhain, there was this belief as well that the veil between this world and the next world, the other world, was thin or would be parted even. There's various interpretations. Some say that the veil is opened, others say it's just very thin. But whatever way we want to describe it, the veil is not as strongly closed. And that allows for the spirits of the old world, the spirits of the other world to return. This was the belief, and that is why people at this time of the year wore a mask when they went out, especially at night time. So the wearing of masks, it wasn't meant to scare people, it was meant to protect people from the spirit world in case spirits would claim them and bring them back with them to the other world. And you might ask, why would they want to do that? Well, it could be a malevolent spirit, for instance, seeking a slave from this world to serve them in the next. Or it could be someone seeking revenge. They didn't live long enough to take revenge on them while they were alive, so even better if they could get them while they were dead. They're all-powerful spirit. So people wore masks, the Ig fiddle, and the masks were designed as a way to protect people when they went walking about, especially at night time, the dark hours during this time of year. So here we see the origins of the modern Halloween. Now, Halloween itself comes from the Old English All Hallows Evening. The een, there's an apostrophe between the two e's. That represents the eve or the evening. Hallow means a saint, a holy person. So in the Christian calendar, the 1st of November is All Saints' Day. And the Christians, the early Christians, came to these parts, Ireland, Britain, the Celtic world, shall we say, Scotland, Ireland, Cornwall, Brittany, northern Spain, Galicia. This tradition of Samhain was very strong in these places, and when the early Christians arrived, they didn't obliterate the ancient pagan festivals. They didn't even obliterate paganism. They merely adapted. And it's very interesting when you look at Irish history. We had no martyrs in the early Irish church, the 5th, 6th centuries. There were no martyrs. Martyrdom comes into the Irish church after the Reformation in the 16th, the 17th and 18th centuries. And it's one group of Christians killing another group of Christians. So you see how well they love each other. Anyhow, the thing is that in the ancient Irish church, many of the early Irish saints that we know of, like Bridget or Senan or Alton, or any of these saints, Laserian indeed, when you read their lives and when you look at the stories connected with them, you realize that a lot of them were Druids or came from that tradition. The shape-shifting, all of that, magic cloaks, that sort of thing. This is pure Druidism, but it is adapted. And many would say that the ancient Druids regarded Christianity as a logical extension of Druidism, and in many ways it is. So that is when you look at Christianity and you confine it to the 4 Gospels of Christ. Forget about St. Paul, forget about the Old Testament, just look at the 4 Gospels and the way of living that Christ encourages. So that is very, very it's very well aligned, it's compatible with Druidism. So this is where, as I say, All Hallows comes from. It was the All Saints evening, the Eve of All Saints. So it's a festival, an old Druidic festival that marks the passage from summer or autumn into winter, but also it emphasizes the growth that's taking place in the silence, in the darkness, that will give rise to fresh burst of greenery in the spring. So it's interesting that when we look at the Halloween festival, then it comes to the fore with Imbolc in the spring. And Imbolc is around the 1st of February. It's the feast of St. Bridget. And Bridget is the patroness of livestock, of growth in the gardens, new life, spring growth. So again, you can see where the Christianity and the Druidism intertwine here. And again, both are fire festivals as well. And the ashes from the fires, in fact, were often stored and used as potash to spread on the land to encourage new growth, potassium and minerals from that into the ground. So, but also there were purification rituals during these times, at Halloween, at Imbolc, at Bealtaine in the 1st of May. the summer festival, and Lunasa then in the autumn. They're all fire festivals, but the idea was that the herds of cattle and sheep and horses would be led through two bonfires. And then when the bonfires had burnt down, the herds were driven back over the ashes, because it was a purification ritual. But also, it was believed that the minerals in the ash would help prevent hooves from being diseased. So you think of the foot and mouth disease that plagues so many animals nowadays in farms and that type of thing. So this is where these traditions come from. And as I say, the Halloween Samhain is the beginning of new growth, new life. It marks an ending of one year and the beginning of a new year. So that's why it's a very important festival in the ancient Irish world. Now, nowadays, when we think of Halloween, we see this crass commercialism everywhere, and we see a lot of American ideas, and particularly from Hollywood, and zombies and horror films and that sort of thing coming into it, and Dracula and Frankenstein and all of that. That was not part of the original Halloween, not part of the original Samhain. The original Samhain was all about protecting oneself against evil spirits, or spirits that might try to wreak vengeance on you for something you did to them when they were alive. That's why you wore the mask. It's also a time of divination. That's why we had the ancient games with the bobbing apple or the snap apple, or the saucers with the earth and the rings and the peas and the matchsticks and all of that, and the water. These divination rituals, they were all part of the games. And then when we look at the turnip or the cooking apple, this was the special skill of the man of the house to carve out a frightening skull or head from these things. Now, try to carve a pumpkin with a knife. It's quite a hard thing to do. Try to do it with a cooking apple, which is quite slippery to hold. That is also quite a skill in itself to do. But that's what was done, and it was a sort of a test of masculinity and skill with a knife. The man of the house had to do that. So, and these things then would be placed at the doorway of a house, again, to ward off evil spirits from coming in. That was the idea behind it. So when the Irish immigrants went across the Atlantic to the Americas in the middle of the 19th century, mainly after the famine, they brought their traditions with them. But turnips were hard to come by, and the Native American pumpkin and the gourd became available, and the Irish immigrants found these were much easier to carve and even more delightful to carve. Because they were so easy to carve, they could be more imaginative and inventive with the types of scary faces that they produced on them, etc. So it's wonderful to see how that tradition that was brought over to America and slightly changed from the pumpkin returning back then to Ireland instead of the turnip as the favoured carving jack-o'-lantern. So again, where does the jack-o'-lantern come from? Well, that's a lovely old story of a man named Jack. We don't know his surname, but the story goes, the folklore, that Jack was quite a trickster and had a great way about him of persuading people to entertain him to drinks in the pub and the tavern, but he himself never repaid the compliment, or rarely repaid it. And word got around of his stinginess and that, and one evening a tall, dark gentleman appeared in the local tavern, got talking to Jack, and then he bought Jack a drink, and Jack had the drink, and then Jack didn't return the compliment. The man got a little bit annoyed with him, and then Jack realized that the man had cloven hooves for feet, and he knew then he was in trouble. So he said to the man, "I'll tell you what, if you can convert yourself into a silver coin here on the counter, I'll buy you a drink." The man said, "Oh, I want more than just your drink. I want your soul." And Jack said, "Agreed." And so the man converted himself in a whiff into a silver coin on the counter, whereupon Jack took the rosary beads out of his pocket and put the crucifix down on top of it and trapped the devil. That's the story. So the devil screamed at him from the coin, and Jack said, "I'll only release you. I'll remove the crucifix when you promise not to take my soul to hell." So the devil agreed. Jack removed the rosary and the crucifix, and the devil reappeared and scampered out the door. About 20 years later, Jack died, and he arrived at the gates of heaven, and St. Peter said, "Oh, Jack, there's such a litany of misdemeanors here against you, we can't possibly let you in. You swindled and you blackguarded everyone. You stole." So Jack had to go down to hell. And at the gates of hell, the devil said, "I keep my promises. I'm a gentleman. I can't let you in here. But what I will do is I'll give you a lantern to light your way through the darkness forevermore. That in-between world, that limbo between heaven and hell." And so he threw a turnip at him with a lighted candle inside it. That's where the story comes from. Now, there are variations on that theme of the jack-o'-lantern, but that's the main theme, the main story of it. That's where it comes from. So the country is illuminated now with jack-o'-lanterns, and of course, in the Irish folklore, the jack-o'-lantern was often the spirit of Jack playing mischievous tricks on people, leading them into bogs late at night time when they were on their way home in a drunken stupor. So it's great old fun when you think about all these legends and where they come from and the stories, but this is what entertained people around the fireside when there was no television or any of those technological details and entertainments in the past. So as I say, the jack-o'-lantern has returned to us now, no longer as a turnip, but as a pumpkin. And it's wonderful to see. And, well, it's one of the more positive aspects of cross-cultural pollination.
As pointed out by Declan, the tradition of wearing masks during Halloween is lifted directly from the Samhain. The creatures of the underworld prepare the world for winter, the harvest having gone, the warmth of the land fading, so it may again return in the spring. But where did these creatures emerge from? What are these places where the veil between worlds thinned and allowed for this crossover? Well, perhaps the most interesting example is Oneghat in County Roscommon. The cave, also known as Uvnaghat, the Cave of the Cats, of which Oneghat is an anglicisation, sits upon the site of what was once called Cruachan, now Rathcrogan. Cruachan was once the seat of power for one of the most ancient of Ireland's kingdoms, in this instance, Connacht. Ruled by King Ailill and his no less powerful queen, Maeve, there is a legend regarding these connections in history which rules the legacy of Oneghat and likely has a larger part to play in the very concept of Halloween hauntings. During the 1st century, Ireland was a completely pagan country. It would not be until much later that Christianity was brought to the country, and even then the two faiths lived side by side for many long years, which is how we get the Celtic cross and how and why it differs from the standard Christian version. This is a time of that same filigree and knot, but before the shapes we are used to emerge. This is the connacht of King Ailill and Queen Maeve, a fearsome and proud kingdom composing most of the west of Ireland. It was during a Samhain, being the night of Harvest End, that a feast was held in Cruachan. While the king and queen dine with their soldiers, two men hang from the gallows. After some time drinking and meeting, King Ailill rises and proclaims that whoever will tie the corpse with a withe, likely a part of flexile willow branch bound in a knot, he will reward that man that manages to tie them around this man's ankle. In some versions of the story, the reward is a sword with a golden hilt, sure to give status to anyone who wields it strapped to his hip. When he offers this, the warriors are all silent, bar one. Nara. Nara rose and complied with the king's request. Being a lesser warrior of the court, he is likely at this time eager to show his courage, which was the primary virtue in this day and age, or at least that is shown through surviving literature to be the primary virtue. As soon as he tries to tie this willow branch segment around the ankle of this dead man, it snaps off with elastic force, almost resistance. On the third instance, he manages to tie the knot and fasten it around his ankle. Tying the knot is something that will come up again in this story. And as soon as the knot holds, the hanged man flickers back to life. Nara, oh brave Nara, sling me around your neck and bring me to water. I was awful thirsty when I was hanged. Take us to the house that's nearest us. No doubt shocked, but duty-bound and feeling responsible, Nara hoisted the undead upon his back and lifted him outside. To 3 houses, Nara takes the hanged man until he finally drinks from a washing tub surrounded by a sleeping family in the third home. Without warning, he sprays the water in the faces of each person in the house, killing them instantly. Having had enough of the undead's madness, Nara wordlessly turned with the helpless undead on his back and sprinted back to Cruachan. What met him was not the great clan's feasting hall, but rather a ruin of the place. Fires climbing high, and beside it, a mass of severed heads, those of the men and women he was feasting with just minutes ago. Nara spots a host of armed warriors marching down into a passage deep into the hill and pursues them into the darkness, descending into a sheer, lightless abyss. The warrior emerges into a great chamber where the host kneels before a king. Realizing he's in the presence of something of the other world, Nara stopped in his tracks and addressed the king, asking reason for the slaughter. If he could not prevent or take revenge for what was done, now being surrounded by these armed warriors, he would at least have an answer for why it had to occur, some way to make sense of it. He would not get it. Rather than answering, the king demanded Nara go to a house within the mound, where a woman would welcome him. Doing as asked, Nara nodded and made his way there, and he stays in the other world for some time, 3 days and 3 nights, coming to terms with his new liminal existence in the world of the fairies, also known as the She. Ever on guard, the only person he comes to trust is this woman, who he would take as a wife. Eventually, having seen his character, she chooses to tell him that the She plan to destroy Cruachan. That was not a vision of what was actually occurring, it was a premonition. And she says that the She are holding on to sacred relics, treasures stolen from humankind. And the She intend next Samhain, when the veil is thin again, to leave their mound and rout Cruachan, completely destroying it. She then instructs him how to leave, but tells him that she is pregnant with child. With his head understandably spinning, Nara departs the She for a moment, returns to True Cruachan, where not a moment has passed, despite having been gone in his mind for 3 days and 3 nights. The different passaging of time between the lands of the She, the other world, and the lands of man is a very common motif in mythology from this era. He is given the golden hilted sword, and he explains himself and his adventures, and it takes some effort to convince Ailill and Maeve, But when he produces a piece of wild garlic that was grown in the other world by the Sidhe, they choose to believe him. So he demands the mound be sealed. So they summon a champion, Fergus MacRoch, and it is sealed. But right before it's closed, Nara dives down into the passageway, never to be seen again, giving up the status of the golden hilted sword. Whether he survived the second passage or not is not for mortals to know. One thing we do know is that eventually, Cruachan, now Rathcrogan, faded from glory. Today, it is an archaeological site. Its influence waned in history due to strains upon the lands of the time. One may wonder if, in the long run, the fairies had their way of it, but the brave Nara may still be in that other world, resplendent with treasures and family. Thank you for joining me by the bonfire tonight, and special thanks to Dr. Declan Downey for his contribution. This project has been a labor of love for the past full calendar year. I've done it for the culture and the season and for the curiosity of it all. And every moment has been worth it. I hope you'll join me again when the fire blazes next time and we speak more tales unbound. Good night.